I want to show you something we're doing with our agent skills for both Remix and React Router that I think is pretty nice. It ties it directly to the appropriate version of the package, as well as keeps the skill pretty small and tells the agent exactly what to pull out when it needs it, and allows the agent to discover the true docs, the true canonical source of truth for these different libraries. This is kind of what agent skills are supposed to be, right? This progressive disclosure and whatnot. And I've seen a bunch of different solutions that do this. To me, this seems like the simplest way to do it. So without further ado, let me show you what we're doing. Here, I'm just going to focus on React Router. So we have a very simple Vite app. We can get it running. And you can see that it's running perfect. Let's just go ahead and install React Router so we can get a React Router app going. And to get the skills that I'm working on, we're just going to run this command. Perfect. So we got our skills, and let's get our agent running. All right, so we can see that we have the React Router skill. So here I'm just going to say, I want to scaffold out a CRUD application for my board game library that I have. Go ahead and just set up all the routes that I'll need. You don't need to set up any sort of database or anything like that. Just the routes is good enough for now. When I run that, it's probably going to figure out that we're in a React Router app and it wants to pull in that skill of React Router. Nothing new here. This is exactly how skills work. This is very normal, very expected. What it does that's a little bit different, very nice, is it starts reading my node modules. Why is it reading the node modules? Because we've shipped the docs in the node modules. And so it's going and it's finding the declarative mode docs, and it's finding what it thinks it needs, running through all that, figuring out everything that it should update, and it's going ahead and creating the application that I asked for. Here we can see that it scaffolded out a very simple board game library. It added some games that I don't own, but that's okay. It was making its best guess. And if we jump to the code, we can see that it did, in fact, use React Router. It used the declarative mode, which is like the very old version of React Router. Most people are familiar with, just a little client-side library. So that's pretty cool. So what exactly is this skill? Well, it's really simple. We just take a look. It says, this is for building React Router applications. And then it tells you about the different modes of React Router. You got framework mode, data mode, and declarative mode. So it looks like a defaulted declarative mode, which is quite expected. Tells you some things about RSC framework and RSC data mode. So if you want to use React Server Components, it explains that. And then it basically tells you to go look in the node modules when you need more information. It also has a different reference for each of these different modes. And these references are very, very simple. And they just kind of give you the high level of how it works with very simple examples of how to get started. Super simple, but I found that this is actually pretty powerful for getting started. And of course, you can update the skill yourself all you want, but by having the skill go directly to the node modules to pull out the docs as it needs actual APIs and actual guidance, it's always going to be pinned to the correct version of React Router that you're using in your repo. So your skill doesn't have to be updated and it won't get out of date. All right, let's see what else this can do. Okay, I want to set up an in-memory database for my games so that we can actually experience this as if it were a real website. Go ahead and add some artificial slowdowns to the mutations, the queries and whatnot, so we can feel what it would feel like for a user on a bit of a slower connection. Skipping ahead of all the LLM's work, we can go ahead and see that it did add the different games and there are these slowdowns. I can delete Wingspan because it's not my favorite game. Controversial. And I can maybe add a new game. And looks like it all works with the pending UI, which is great. If I look into the code, sometimes people still do this, even in the age of AI. We can probably see that it's going to have used a few use effects to get things running and going. Yeah, this is super ugly, crazy React code. There's just a lot of management of state and whatnot that we could probably do better with. Can we go ahead and switch to data mode so we can get rid of all our use effects and use states and whatnot and just use the data mutation queries, the loading in the actions and whatnot that React Router gives us? That's probably a bit too leading, isn't it? Can we switch to the data mode for React Router to make this a little bit simpler? Let's try that. Here you can see that it read more modules, so it's figuring out what data mode is and what it has. It's finding a routing, data loading, actions, route object, all these different things that the reference in my skill kind of directs it towards, but ultimately it is also going to start finding its own documents that it thinks that will be helpful. Now that it's finished up, I can see that it is using create browser router and it's got loaders and actions, which is great, and not a use effect to be found, except for in these different references that say you don't need to use effects. And testing, we can see that our library is still working, which is great, but it's using the loaders and the actions instead of a bunch of use effects and use state and all that kind of stuff, which is really cool. If I update it, let's see, I should still have a pending indicator. And there we can see that it updated the amount of players. Great. Okay, I know there's a framework mode. What would that give us over the current data mode that we have? And of course, it's going to read a few more modules just to figure out what exactly is framework mode. Didn't take too long that time. And it tells me that we get some type safety, it looks like. We don't have a big route config. Maybe that matters, maybe it doesn't. But it can pretty quickly figure out exactly what it needs, and it doesn't have to go off to the website and parse a bunch of HTML or trying to see if there's a markdown file or whatever. It just has the markdown directly here. It doesn't have to do a full network request just to get the correct documentation for the specific version of React Router that we're on. And of course, it's giving me a recommendation saying, hey, what you got is good enough for now, which is totally fair, but I want to use framework mode. Let's go ahead and switch to framework mode anyway, but we can still keep this a spa. I don't need the server-side rendering stuff, but I really do want that type safety. That seems really nice. I also want the automatic code splitting that comes with framework mode. There seems like a lot of nice features in it, so let's go ahead and do that. All right, it says it's done. Let's see what it's done. So the package JSON, we can see that there's a few more React Router packages that it added, which is great. Inside of the Vite config, we can see it's using the React Router plugin, so that's good. And then we can also see that we've got like our route.tsx, and we've got our different routes, which all should be wrapped up in this routes.ts file. So this seems correct. And here we can see that it is working as expected. We can go to the different games, we can add a new game, etc. It's also letting me know that we've got some future flag warnings. So I'm going to go ahead and say, hey, update all the future flags. And also let's just go ahead and do server-side rendering. Why not? It went ahead and found the future doc, which lists all of our future flags and what you need to do to upgrade them. So to go ahead and do that upgrade for me. So I can go into the React Router config and see that all the future flags are turned on, which is pretty cool. And if I go into different pages, everything still works as expected. Looking at individual route modules, we can see that it's using meta, it's using the loader, it's using the action, and then it pulls in this little game API, database thing that it set up. So this gives me one more idea to try. Hey, instead of an in-memory database, let's use a SQLite database, and let's wire it up through the middleware in the context that React Router provides, instead of using this module, which I assume has some sort of side effect to set up the DB. So we'll run that little command and see which docs it pulls in. Probably going to pull in the middleware doc would be my guess. Yeah, it looks like it's pulling in sessions and cookies and the middleware docs to figure out how exactly to set this up properly. So taking a look at our root, we can see that we have the database middleware that it's set up and created and passed into this middleware. And now inside of all these different functions, it actually pulls out that DB client from the context, and the database itself is using Node SQLite. So that's pretty cool. So now if I add a new game, I can go ahead and see that it persists and is no longer in an in-memory database. I can kill the connection and restart it, and it's still there, which is nice. Databases are very great. So there you go. We've gone through the 3 stable modes of React Router. We migrated between the different ones, and it all worked seamlessly. And the model never even had to go look up docs. It never did a web fetch. It had all the documentation it needed in its node modules pinned to the exact version that we were using. So if we update React Router in the future and things have changed, it will have the correct docs still. And that skill is very, very simple, and simple for a reason. Just tells it mostly to go look up the docs. And you can change that skill to say whatever you want, because skills are yours, but docs are ours. And we just want for agents to have a good way to find the canonical source of truth without having to scour the internet for it. Anyway, that's what I've been working on. I hope this makes coding with agents a lot easier for you when you're using a library like React Router.